Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky, Lord, I lift your name on high.
The year was 1971. The band was the five-man Electrical Band, a Canadian band that had a hit song. It was number 4 on the charts in Canada. It was number 3 on the charts in the United States. And it was called Signs. Signs, signs, everywhere a sign, messing up the scenery, breaking my mind. Do this, don't do that. Can't you read the signs? Well, that song was controversial, a little bit humorous, but it ended on a rather positive note where he sees a sign on a church building that says, "Welcome. Come on in, kneel down and pray." And he accepted the invitation. Well, we use this illustration to start our lift session tonight just to say that signs are definitely everywhere and they can be helpful. Sometimes they're irritating, but there's no question that God's signs are always a blessing. And that's what we're talking about. In our last lift session, we talked about signs in the Old Testament, miraculous, supernatural signs where God exercised power, but he was also communicating a powerful message. Now, this time, we're going to be going into the New Testament, and we'll look at some signs that are there in general, but in particular, I want us to focus on signs that are showing the divinity of Jesus Christ, messianic signs. As we get started, I'm just compelled to mention that the Gospel of John is just such a book. In fact, the framework was built around 7 signs to indicate by the nature of Christ that he was indeed the Son of God. 7 signs proving his divinity. And so it starts with number 1, the turning of water into wine at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. Magnificent event. Happy event, but they'd run out of wine. And Jesus' mother told the servants, "You do whatever he tells you." And he is able to change the composition of that water until it becomes wine. Or we go on and we read about an official's son. In the Gospel of John, it talks about how Jesus, when he left Judea and come up into Galilee, an official had heard about it. And so he goes to him. When he comes to him, he says, "My son is sick. He's at the point of death. Won't you come and won't you help him?" And Jesus said, "Unless you see signs, you will not believe." Well, Jesus told him, "Go on. When you get home, your son's going to be okay." And he went on his way. When he got home, the servant who greeted him told him that his son was improved. He asked him, "Well, when did the change take place? When did his fever break? When did he start the recovery?" And the servant told him it was about the 7th hour. And the man knew. It was the exact moment that Jesus was speaking to him. It was during that conversation that the tide turned. We go on and read in the 5th chapter about the healing of a lame man at the pool of Bethesda. In chapter 6, we read about Jesus amazingly feeding thousands of people by multiplying loaves and fish. We see him walking on the waters of a stormy sea. In chapter 9, we read about him healing a man who was born blind from birth. It wasn't just some psychosomatic illness, but a true organic and physical illness. And he healed him. And then there's the climactic sign that's found in the 11th chapter. And that was the resurrection of Lazarus, who had died. He'd been dead several days. His body was decomposing. But Jesus calls him forth from the grave. When you conclude the book of John, it says in John chapter 21 and verse 25, now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So many signs, each one showing something about Jesus' power, his authority, his divine nature. But in particular now, we're going to take a look at some signs that cluster around the birth of Jesus. We talked about those Old Testament signs. Now we're into New Testament, and we're going to focus in on some of these messianic signs. There was an expectancy during this time that the Messiah was coming. And these early miracles that were associated with the birth of Christ were a link to his messianic identity. So I look forward to examining these with you and just stopping to think, just stopping to reflect. As Jesus fulfilled these various passages, what is it that God was trying to say to us? Let's think about that together. I think you'll be encouraged. I think we'll be uplifted in this lift session tonight. I want to thank you for being a part. Remember that it's the Word of God that directs our paths, but God, our sovereign God, is working providentially in our lives today. He opens doors and closes doors, and we need to keep our eyes open to his workings and to his will. But may you have deep belief that Jesus is God's Son and that he is worthy of your trust, and to be crowned as King and Lord and Director of your life because of these many signs that surrounded his birth. God bless your study.
You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay. From the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky, Lord, I lift your name on high.